This little girl stops a 21-year-old from marrying a millionaire's father, but moments later, something worse happens. Please comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of bells echoed through the imposing marble church as the tiny figure burst down the center aisle, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The 4-year-old girl, looking even more fragile due to severe malnutrition, clutched at the hem of the white lace dress while screaming with all the strength of her little lungs. "Don't marry him. He's evil. He hurts the girls." The silence that fell over the guests was deafening. The young bride, 21 years old, radiant in her imported silk gown, froze before the altar. Her face, previously flushed with happiness, instantly paled. The 91-year-old patriarch, leaning on his ivory cane, frowned deeply, his small, dark eyes fixed on the intruding child. On the right side of the church, the 30-year-old millionaire widower watched the scene with growing curiosity. His imposing appearance and elegant bearing contrasted with the surprised expression that took over his face. There was something in the girl's desperate voice that inexplicably piqued his attention. The child continued to cling to the bride's dress, her dirty little hands leaving small marks on the pristine fabric. "I saw him talking. He talks about taking the girl's money and then they disappear. I saw it through the window." An indignant murmur began to spread among the high society guests. Women in expensive dresses whispered scandalized behind their fans, while men in tuxedos nervously adjusted their bow ties. The ceremony, which was supposed to be the social event of the year in the metropolis, was turning into an embarrassing spectacle. The priest, visibly disturbed, tried to regain control of the situation. Perhaps it would be best to remove the child and continue with the ceremony. "No!" The girl clung even tighter to the dress. "She needs to know." The other girls didn't know, and now they're gone. The young bride, daughter of a traditional family of merchants who had faced serious financial difficulties in recent years, looked at the child with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Something in the desperate sincerity of that small voice made her hesitate. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" she asked, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "I work shining shoes in the square in front of the big building. Every day I see the evil grandpa through the window. He talks to men in suits and talks about marrying girls to take their money. He has papers that make the girls sign, and then they leave and never come back." The patriarch, who had remained silent until then, banged his cane on the floor forcefully. "This is nonsense. How can you listen to the ravings of a street urchin?" But the millionaire had approached, his sharp eyes studying both his father and the little beggar. During his years building an empire based on smart investments on Wall Street, he had developed a keen instinct for detecting lies. And there was something in the patriarch's expression that he didn't like. "What kind of papers did you see?" he asked gently to the child. The girl turned to him, her big eyes shining with surprising intelligence for someone so young. "Thick, white papers with lots of numbers. The evil grandpa always says, 'When she signs, all the money will be ours.' And then he laughs in a way that scares me." The bride, still kneeling, felt a chill run down her spine. She vaguely remembered her father mentioning some documents that she would need to sign after the wedding, something about legal formalities that she hadn't questioned at the time. "This is ridiculous," exclaimed the patriarch, his voice trembling slightly. "I will not allow a vagrant to destroy this sacred ceremony." "Dad," said the millionaire, his voice taking on a dangerously low tone, "perhaps we should hear what the child has to say." The tension in the air was palpable. The guests remained silent, divided between scandal and growing curiosity about the girl's accusations. The little girl, feeling that someone was finally paying attention, took a deep breath and continued. "I know the names of the other girls. The first was named after a yellow flower, the second was named after a shiny stone, and the third was named after a bird that sings in the morning. They were all young and pretty like her, pointing to the bride. And they all disappeared after signing the papers. The millionaire felt his blood run cold. The description of the third woman had hit him like a lightning bolt. His late wife, who had passed away just 2 years ago in circumstances that were never entirely clear, had exactly a name that fit that description. An impossible coincidence began to take shape in his mind. "Continue," he said, ignoring the father's withering glare. "I hear everything from the square. The evil grandpa says that when they sign, all the assets go to him. He says it's easy because the girls' families owe a lot of money and they're happy when he marries them. But after they sign, something bad happens and they go away forever." The church was now in complete silence. Even the patriarch had stopped protesting, his face taking on a sickly pallor. The young bride stood up slowly, her mind processing the terrible implications of what she was hearing. "Are you saying," she asked in a trembling voice, "that my marriage is just a scheme to steal my inheritance?" The girl nodded vigorously. "Your daddy owes money to the evil grandpa. I heard them talking last week. The evil grandpa said that when you signed the papers, the debt would be paid, and he would get everything." The millionaire watched his father's face and saw something that terrified him. Guilt. Not surprise, not indignation, but pure and unmistakable guilt. At that moment, the child's words ceased to be improbable accusations and became a terrible truth that he did not want to accept. The bride tore the veil from her head, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "And my inheritances, the family property, the investments that my grandmother left?" "Everything," whispered the girl. "He gets everything." The sound of fabric tearing echoed through the church as the young woman, in an explosion of fury and despair, began to destroy her own wedding dress. The screams that followed were louder than any church bell, and when she turned to the patriarch, her eyes burned with a fury that promised devastating consequences. 3 days after the scandal at the church, the small boarding house downtown had become an unlikely refuge for 2 broken souls. The former bride, who now insisted on being called only by her first name, shared a tiny room with 5 other struggling women. Her hands, once manicured for the wedding, were now rough from washing clothes to pay for her stay. The 4-year-old girl watched her with childish curiosity, admiring how someone who looked like a princess could adapt so quickly to that simple life. In fact, since revealing the truth about the patriarch, the child couldn't stop thinking about the expression of pain she had seen on the millionaire's face when she mentioned the third wife. "Why did you save me?" asked the former bride, while folding her silk clothes, now wrinkled and stained. The girl was playing with pieces of cardboard on the floor, building small houses. "Because I saw your face. It was just like the faces of the other girls when they didn't know something bad was going to happen." At that same moment, on the other side of the city, the millionaire was pacing nervously through his father's luxurious office. The mahogany-paneled walls and antique furniture that once represented family tradition now seemed to hide sinister secrets. His fortune, built through careful investments in stocks and diversified with assets like gold and even some cryptocurrencies, suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of the possibility that everything had been built on crimes. "You need to explain to me about the previous wives," he said, his voice controlled but laden with tension. The patriarch, visibly aged after the events at the church, was sitting in his leather armchair, avoiding his son's gaze. "This is ridiculous. You're going to believe the fantasies of a street kid?" "I'm going to believe the facts." The millionaire opened a desk drawer and began rifling through the documents. "If there's nothing to hide, you won't mind if I examine the marriage contracts." The patriarch's reaction was immediate and revealing. He stood up abruptly, trying to block access to the drawer. "These are private documents. You have no right." "I have every right. Half of this company is mine, and if you used family resources for crimes, it directly affects me." The millionaire pushed his father aside firmly, continuing his search. Meanwhile, at the boarding house, the former bride, was beginning to piece together a terrible puzzle. She had called some high society friends, discreetly asking about the patriarch's previous wives. What she discovered made her nauseous. They were all young, they all had indebted families, and they all disappeared in strange circumstances, she murmured to herself, while the girl continued to play on the floor. The child looked up. "Are you sad?" "I'm thinking. Do you remember anything else about what you saw from the window?" The girl stopped playing, her expression becoming serious. The evil grandpa had friends, important men who came to visit. They always talked about cleaning up problems and making people disappear, but not with magic. They talked about places far from here. What kind of places? Places where nobody looks. Farms far from the city. Houses in the middle of nowhere. The girl resumed her games, but her voice had lost its childish innocence. "Sometimes I heard numbers too. A lot of money. Millions and millions." Back in the office, the millionaire finally found what he was looking for. A folder hidden in the back of the drawer contained marriage contracts of 3 different women. Each document was identical in structure. In case of any eventuality, all of the wife's assets would be automatically transferred to the husband. His hands trembled when he saw the last name on the list. His own wife had signed a similar document. "How could you?" he whispered, confronting his father with the paper in his hands. The patriarch had lost all composure. His hands were shaking, and beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The company was going bankrupt. We needed capital. It was the only way to save everything." "Save what? By killing innocent people?" "They weren't eliminated." The patriarch hesitated. "They were relocated. Places where they could live peacefully, far from here." "Lies!" The millionaire slammed his fist on the table. "You're lying. My wife never relocated. She died in a suspicious accident right after signing these papers." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of footsteps in the hall. The secretary had arrived for the day, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the office. The patriarch took advantage of the distraction to go to a locked cabinet from which he removed a small gun. "Son, you can't expose this. Our entire family will be destroyed. All our wealth, all our investments. Everything will turn to dust." The millionaire backed away, his hands still holding the incriminating contracts. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Protecting what I built, what we built together." The patriarch's eyes gleamed with desperate madness. "That child knows too much. The former bride too. They need to be silenced before they destroy decades of work." At that moment, the millionaire understood the true extent of his father's crimes. It wasn't just about matrimonial fraud. It was an elaborate scheme of inheritance appropriation that involved eliminating witnesses. His own wife had been a victim of this diabolical machination. At the boarding house, the girl suddenly stopped playing and looked out the window. "There's a black car parked outside, the same one I saw at the evil grandpa's building." The former bride ran to the window and saw 2 men in suits getting out of a luxury vehicle. Their faces were hard, professional. They weren't cops or legal officials. They were something much worse. "We need to get out of here, now," she said, picking up the girl in her arms. "Where do we go?" "I don't know, but they found us." As they fled through the back of the boarding house, the former bride made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply running, she needed to confront the situation. She knew the city well. She knew where to find the millionaire. If he really was the son of the monster who almost ruined her life, maybe he was her only chance to get justice. The girl, clinging to her arms, whispered, "The nice guy from the church was the evil grandpa's son. But he was sad when I talked about the bird girl. I don't think he knew about the crimes." "How can you be so sure?" "Because he cried. And bad people don't cry when they find out bad things they already knew." As they ran through the busy streets of the metropolis, dodging the men who were chasing them, The former bride realized that her only hope was to find that millionaire. If he really didn't know about his father's crimes, maybe he could help them. But if he was involved in the scheme, they would be walking straight into a fatal trap. The confrontation in the office had ended unexpectedly. The millionaire, taking advantage of a moment of distraction from his father, managed to disarm the patriarch and lock the gun in the safe. The old man collapsed into the armchair, defeated, muttering fragmented confessions about decades of crimes that went far beyond what anyone could imagine. "There were 17 women," whispered the patriarch, tears streaming down his wrinkled face, "all with substantial inheritances. All with families desperate for money." The millionaire felt his legs weaken. 17, not just 3 as he had assumed. His wife had been just one of the many victims of a system that his own father had created and perfected over the years. How could you hide this for so long? Bought judges, bribed investigators, forged documents? The patriarch wiped his face with trembling hands. Each death looked accidental. Car accidents, food poisoning, falls. Always something that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. At that moment, the office phone rang. The millionaire answered and immediately recognized the voice of one of his private security guards. "Sir, the situation has become complicated. The 2 women you were looking for managed to escape. They're heading to the company building." "What 2 women?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "The former bride and the child who caused the scandal at the church. Your men found them at the boarding house, but they escaped. It looks like they're coming after you." The millionaire looked at his father, who had paled even more. "Cancel any operation against them. Immediately." "But, sir, your previous orders were—" "I didn't give any orders," he exploded. "Who authorized this?" The silence on the other end of the line was revealing. The patriarch had used company resources to eliminate the witnesses without his son's knowledge. 20 minutes later, the former bride and the girl arrived at the imposing commercial building that housed the family offices. The child immediately recognized the place where she had spent months watching through the window, shining shoes to survive. "It's here," she said, pointing to the ground floor. "From that window I saw everything." The former bride, still panting from the run, observed the luxurious marble lobby. Her own family had lost everything trying to compete with businessmen like the patriarch. Now she was there, penniless, with no assets, but determined to get justice. "We need to get to his office." "The evil grandpas or the sons?" "The sons. If there's a chance of anyone helping us, it's him." They managed to get past security by posing as a mother and daughter on a family visit. The elevator took them to the top floor, where the doors opened to reveal an elegant corridor with panoramic city views. When they reached the main room, they found a scene they hadn't expected. The millionaire was standing before a wall covered in documents and photographs, like a detective organizing evidence from a crime scene. The patriarch was sitting in the corner, visibly defeated. "You came," said the millionaire, turning to them. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. "I need to apologize. I didn't know about any of this." The girl ran to the evidence wall, her big eyes scanning the photographs. "It's them, the girls I saw in the conversations." The former bride approached more slowly, observing the 17 photographs lined up chronologically. Young women, all smiling, all dead because of one man's greed. "Your wife was the 15th, she said softly, recognizing the photo of a brunette and elegant woman. "She was." The millionaire closed his eyes for a moment. "And you would have been the 18th if this brave little one hadn't intervened." The patriarch, still sitting in his armchair, watched the scene with a mixture of regret and resignation. "I built an empire of blood," he murmured. "Billions in assets, investments scattered around the world, properties worth fortunes, all based on the suffering of innocent families. And now," asked the former bride, "what happens to all this wealth built on crimes?" The millionaire looked at the evidence organized on the wall, then at the child who had saved her life, and finally at the father who had destroyed so many lives. Now we do what should have been done decades ago. Each family of the victims will receive compensation equivalent to the stolen assets. The company will be restructured to repair the damage caused. And him? The former bride pointed to the patriarch. He will confess everything, publicly, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to repair the harm he caused. The girl, who had remained silent watching the photographs, suddenly turned to them. And the families of the girls? Do they know their daughters didn't have real accidents? The question hit everyone like a punch to the stomach. For decades, entire families had lived with the pain of unexplained losses, never knowing that their daughters had been systematically murdered. "They deserve to know the truth," said the millionaire, "all of them." At that moment, a new complication arose. The secretary rushed into the room, carrying a tablet with urgent news. "Sir, you need to see this. The story leaked to the press." On the screen, a news report showed images of the wedding disruption at the church, with the sensational headline, "High Society Scandal, Child Accuses Patriarch of Deadly Marriage Scheme." The millionaire immediately realized the implications. Now everyone will know. There's no way to control the situation anymore. "Is that good or bad?" asked the former bride. "It means we can no longer resolve this discreetly. The whole city, the whole country will follow our every move." The girl, with her childish wisdom, made an observation that silenced everyone. "Maybe it's better that way. Secrets make people suffer. If everyone knows, no one can hide bad things anymore." As they watched the report, it became clear that their fight was just beginning. Lawyers were already being contacted by families of the victims. Federal investigators had been called in. The scheme that had worked perfectly in the shadows for decades was now exposed to the light of day. The patriarch slowly rose from his armchair, walking to the window from which the entire city could be seen. 50 years building this empire. 50 years accumulating wealth, power, influence, and a 4-year-old child destroyed everything in 5 minutes. "Didn't destroy," corrected the millionaire. "She revealed what was already rotten inside." The former bride approached the girl, kneeling to be at her height. "You saved not only my life, but the lives of many other women who would have come after me. I just didn't want the girls to be sad like I get when I'm hungry and cold," replied the child with simplicity. But as they processed the implications of the public exposure, none of them realized that the problems were just beginning. Outside the building, a crowd was beginning to form. Some were journalists in search of the story of the century. Others were family members of the victims, finally understanding what had happened to their daughters and sisters. And among them, sinister figures watched discreetly, people who had profited from the patriarch's scheme and now saw their own secrets threatened by the revelation. The little girl had started something that no one could stop anymore. 6 months after the revelation that shook the entire metropolis, life had taken turns that no one could have predicted. The courthouse was packed that Tuesday morning, with journalists from all over the country covering the final trial of the patriarch. But the real transformation wasn't happening in the courtrooms, but in the lives of those who had had the courage to face the truth. The former bride, now living in a small house on the outskirts of the city, had discovered an unexpected inheritance. A distant aunt, whom she barely knew, had left a modest rural property, but enough to restart her life. The irony didn't go unnoticed. She finally had a real inheritance, obtained through family love, not manipulation. The 4-year-old girl lived with her now, officially adopted after months of legal process. The child had transformed completely. Her hair shone, her cheeks were rosy, and she ran around the yard of the rural property as if she had discovered that the world could be a safe place. "Mom, look!" shouted the girl, running towards the house with a drawing in her hands. "Draw a bird that isn't running away." The former bride smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. She had learned to cook, to care for animals, to plant a small vegetable garden. simple things that her previous privileged life had never taught her, but that now brought her a peace that all the money in the world couldn't provide. "It's beautiful, honey. Let's put it on the refrigerator with the others." The kitchen wall was covered with colorful drawings, birds flying freely, houses with flowered gardens, smiling families. The child had exchanged her old desperate drawings for images full of hope. On the other side of the city, the millionaire walked through the corridors of a newly built orphanage. In recent months, he had liquidated large portions of his investments in stocks and even his reserves in gold and cryptocurrencies to finance social projects. The money that once multiplied his profits now fed, educated, and protected vulnerable children. "How many children were we able to serve this month?" he asked the director of the orphanage. 143, and we have a waiting list for 50 more. He nodded, watching the children play in the yard. There was something comforting in seeing those genuine smiles, so different from the forced and self-serving smiles he used to find at his previous social events. His life had changed drastically. The family fortune had been divided among the families of the patriarch's victims, leaving him with enough resources to live comfortably, but without the obscene excess of before. He discovered that he didn't miss the unnecessary luxury. That afternoon, as he did every month, he drove to the rural property where the former bride and the girl lived. It was a ritual that had established itself naturally. He brought supplies, they offered homemade lunch, and everyone updated each other on the progress of legal proceedings and social projects. "How's the trial going?" asked the former bride, serving a vegetable soup grown in her own garden. He was convicted, life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. The millionaire accepted the steaming bowl. "But the most important thing is that he confessed everything, publicly. The names of the accomplices, the details of the crimes, the location of hidden documents." The girl, sitting in a high chair specially adapted for her, swung her legs as she ate. "The evil grandpa won't hurt anyone anymore?" "Never again," he assured. "And besides, we discovered that he had money hidden in secret accounts abroad, euros, dollars, investments that no one knew existed. All of that will go to the families of the victims too." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, until the girl asked a question that caught them by surprise. "Are you going to get married?" The former bride almost choked on her soup, while the millionaire blushed visibly. "Why do you ask that, honey?" managed to say the former bride. "Because you look at each other the same way birds do when they like each other. And because you're happier when he comes to visit us." The childish observation, said with complete innocence, created a moment of awkward tension between the two adults. For months, they had supported each other through the legal and emotional difficulties, developing a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals. "We're friends," said the millionaire gently. "Friends who have been through tough things together." "My old mom used to say that the best marriages start with friendship," replied the girl, innocently returning to her soup. That night, after the child fell asleep, the two adults talked in the garden of the property, watching the stars that shone brightly away from the light pollution of the big city. "She's not wrong, you know," said the former bride softly. "About us, I mean." "I know." He took a deep breath. "But I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. You've been through enough manipulation already. It's not about owing. It's about choosing." She turned to look at him. "For the first time in my life, I can choose based on what I feel, not on what is expected of me or on what solves financial problems. And what do you feel?" She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I feel like I've found a real family. A daughter I chose to love, a man I chose to respect, a life I chose to build." 3 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony on the rural property, with only a few close friends and the children from the orphanage as guests. The girl was the maid of honor, carrying flower petals that she herself had grown in the garden. During the ceremony, when they asked if anyone opposed the wedding, The child raised her hand shyly. "I object," she said, causing a moment of tense silence. "Why, my dear?" asked the bride. "Because you take too long to decide things," she replied, drawing laughter from everyone present. The patriarch, serving his sentence in a maximum security penitentiary, received a letter that day. It was from the girl, who had learned to write and drawn a small bird on the paper. "Dear Grandpa," read the letter in childish handwriting, "I hope you get better in your head. My new family is very happy now. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes people need to be brave to stop bad things." It was a lesson in forgiveness that the old man didn't expect to receive. For the first time in decades, he cried genuine tears of remorse. 5 years later, the girl, now 9 years old, was winning school awards for her drawings. Her colorful birds adorned not only the walls of her house, but also the walls of the orphanage that her adoptive father had expanded to 3 units. The family had grown too. In addition to the girl, they had adopted 2 more children from the orphanage, creating a home full of laughter, mess, and unconditional love. The millionaire, watching his 3 daughters play in the yard, reflected on how life had changed. His wealth was now measured not in stocks or net worth, but in moments like that. A Sunday afternoon, with the children running free, his wife humming in the kitchen, and the certainty that every decision they made the world a little better. The girl who had interrupted a fraudulent marriage 5 years before ran to him, holding a new drawing. "Dad, look, I drew our family." On the paper, 5 figures smiled under a bright blue sky. Birds flew freely around them, and in the corner small letters read, "Real families are made of love, not money." And as he admired the drawing, the millionaire knew that his daughter had discovered the only wealth that really mattered. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you everyday videos that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.